you here in the room may not know who the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is or what the National Wildlife Refuge System represents. So I'm going to do a real brief background on the government agency that we represent. Back in 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt recognized the need to protect nesting pelicans, herons, and egrets from plume hunters at the time. And this was back in 1903, and they established the first National Wildlife Refuge at Pelican Island, which is in Indian River County outside of Vero Beach and Sebastian. Today, that initial investment in conservation has led to 553 national wildlife refuges nationwide. There are over 150 million acres throughout the country and into the Pacific Ocean that we conserve and protect and manage. There are refuges in every state and many of the U.S. territories around the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. With that, all that land, we do entertain lots of visitors, and we have over 40 million visitors using our national wildlife refuges annually. To give you an idea of where they're located, a lot of our national wildlife refuges were purchased with duck stamp dollars. They were the sportsman's contribution to conservation in this country. Everybody that hunts waterfowl has to buy a duck stamp. Those proceeds go to conserving lands and protecting lands for waterfowl breeding habitat, migrating and wintering habitat. So what you'll notice on both coasts and along the Mississippi River and the mid-continent, there's these places that we call flyways, and there's the concentrations of those black dots. And that's where a lot of our national wildlife refuges are located. So, as far as an agency, we have a guiding principle. And back in 1997, Congress told Fish and Wildlife Service that what you're supposed to do with all of those refuges is you're supposed to manage those lands for wildlife. And wildlife on those lands comes first, above and beyond any other use that you might use on that land. In doing so, though, they also said that there are 6 priority public uses. I'm going to mention those in a minute. That if there's the opportunity to allow those uses, those are the things that are part of our tradition, part of our culture as a National Wildlife Refuge system, and those are things that you should encourage and try to incorporate into your refuge programs. It also says that of any public use that you allow on a National Wildlife Refuge, it has to be appropriate and compatible for the reasons why the refuge was established. So if the refuge was established for endangered species, that anything you do on that refuge wouldn't impact negatively those endangered species that it was set up to protect. It also tells us that the refuges have to be managed as a system, that they're not independent of each other. So there's policies and regulations that cover the entire workings of the National Wildlife Refuge system so that there's consistency between the refuges and how they're managed. And the basic premise, and I hope that it's the reason why we're all here tonight, is that we're hoping and looking to manage and conserve lands for future generations. And I know with the people that I've talked to so far about this proposal, that they're all interested and concerned about having places where they can hunt, fish, run their boats, for not just themselves, but their future generations. And I hope, if anything else, tonight we can come to agreement that we all agree, at least on this point, that whatever we do here in the Kissimmee Valley, that we're looking forward into the future and making sure there's places on the landscape that are just as unique and full of wildlife as they are today. So those public uses that Congress has told us that we're supposed to manage for, the 2 that top the list are hunting and fishing. Theodore Roosevelt was known as a conservationist. He set aside over 50 national wildlife refuges during his time as president, but he's also known as an avid hunter and fisher. And those traditions have carried on, and many of our national wildlife refuges throughout the country host both hunting and fishing programs. We're also very much engaged with our youth as far as bringing them out and providing outdoor educational opportunities. And we look for opportunities everywhere we go that we can bring in and bring people out to the wildlife refuges so that we can educate them about the wildlife and the wild things. We also provide opportunities for people that are just visiting to learn a little bit more about the refuge, as well as if they're coming out to participate in photography as well. So these are the things that Congress has said that if you can provide the opportunities for these public uses, then these are the things that we need to want to provide for the public. So how does that relate to the proposal that's here in front of us tonight? And again, I remind you, this is all proposal. This is nothing set in stone. there. We provide opportunities for the public to come out and visit on these landscapes. This is where our hunting programs and fishing programs are centered. This is where we provide those opportunities for outdoor education. Okay. Conservation areas, on the other hand, and when we got involved in this project, what we noticed right off was that there's a wonderful opportunity to be engaged with the local landowners, the ranching community in particular, and we recognize that it's because of their stewardship that we're able to talk here about the wildlife habitats and the unique resources that we have here. And so we wanted to make sure that we protected that and kept their legacy going, provided opportunities for that. So we have things called conservation easements, whereby the landowner maintains the ownership and control of the land, but all we're purchasing as an agency is just certain rights to that property. And primarily those rights that we're interested in is the development rights, so that we want to make sure that they have the chance and the opportunity to maintain their livelihood for their future generations, while at the same time we don't want to see shopping centers and other developments going on in the landscape. So why here? Why did we pick and choose the landscape here in the Kissimmee Valley, the area north of Lake Okeechobee, to concentrate on? Well, there's several reasons. One of the first reasons we recognized is that all of the waters that land here on Lake Wales Ridge in the Kissimmee Valley, that all that water flows into the Kissimmee River and down into Lake Okeechobee. That water in turn flows further south and eventually ends up into the Everglades. It provides a tremendous source of drinking water for the population of South Florida. It provides recreational opportunities for you folks here in the room. And it's really important for us to be able to restore and improve the water quality, the water storage of that water that's entering that system. What happens is if we can improve the water quality entering Lake Okeechobee, the existing programs that are designed to improve the water quality entering the Everglades are that much more efficient. They don't have to work as hard. There's a whole host of threatened and endangered species here in the landscape that we're hoping to protect. And we're also interested as an agency about what's going to happen with climate change. And that's something that we may or may not want to debate tonight, but we are seeing changes in the elevation of the sea surface, and if we're looking at species like Florida panther and Florida black bear, the habitats that they are associated with in the coastal environments, will they have a place and an opportunity to migrate inland and upslope to get away from the rising waters? And that's part of what we're talking about doing here as well. There is an existing conservation landscape, and we're blessed here with everything from Avon Air Park to Kissimmee Prairie Preserve to the South Florida Water Management District lands. There's lots and lots of pieces to this puzzle of conservation here in the Kissimmee Valley. There are also some gaps between those places. So if you look at species like Florida black bear, which are wide-ranging and found throughout the landscape, that move from South Florida all the way up here to the Kissimmee Valley, we're hoping to be able to work with our partners and the landowners to provide connectivity between the existing conservation landscapes, fill in some of those gaps. We're also, I talked earlier about those big six public uses, providing opportunities for hunting and fishing, for environmental education. That's a big part of what the National Wildlife Refuge System does for the local communities. We're looking for that. We think there's a really good opportunity to reach out to the people that are surrounding the valley, people up in Naples or in Orlando and Tampa, visitors that are coming down to this part of the world. Wonderful opportunity to educate them on the landscape that you folks call home. And again, I talked about this a little bit earlier. It's really the stewardship that the ranching community has worked with for the past decades and centuries here in the landscape that has led to us being able to talk about these wonderful resources that we have today. And we want to make sure that we preserve and protect those as well. So how did we actually arrive at this proposal? Those are all good ideas. Well, there's many different land management agencies that are here on the landscape. There's the South Florida Water Management District. There's the Fish and Wildlife Commission. The Nature Conservancy has lands. There's state forests and state parks. And when we got to talking to everybody, they were all saying about the same thing. They all recognized the opportunities that are found here. And we're all kind of moving in the same direction, saying that yes, we want to protect this landscape for future generations. is we mapped the conservation priorities that I just talked about, and we found some concentration areas. And there was a concentration area here north of Lake Okeechobee. There was one in the Fish Eating Creek Basin, and there was one just south of the Caloosahatchee River. Basically, what we said with those is that these are areas we want to look at and pay more attention to and study. And that's where we are today, is we've basically identified areas that we think have the opportunity for greater conservation. In particular, the only one we're working with currently is this area north of Lake Okeechobee, the Kissimmee Basin. This is an area that, based on past research that has identified opportunities for wetland restoration, and we've talked with our opportunities for land conservation, we came up with the idea that said that I think we have about 150,000 acres of land that could be protected as a National Wildlife Refuge and Conservation Area. Of that, about a third of that property we would look to protect as a National Wildlife Refuge. Remember that land base, that steep tidal lands that we would have visitor service facilities and things like that. But the vast majority of that landscape, the 100,000 acres, we would actually be working with the current landowners to keep them in place on the land, raising cattle, maintaining their livelihood, and the only thing that we're interested in that property for is making sure that it stays like that in perpetuity. I mentioned also that we are working with this larger group of people, this group of partners that are talking about these things collectively. And so this is a question that has come up repeatedly, and I want to talk about this just a little bit. It says, does this partnership that these people that are talking together, does it mean that the service is going to control partner lands? Does this mean that we're going to want to go to the South Florida Water Management District and have any kind of activity or oversight of what they're doing? No. What we're doing is we're saying that South Florida, the state, nonprofit organizations, all have their own piece of the puzzle. We're just hoping to add to that and be a partner with that. So with that, any access that is currently occurring on the land, any hunting programs that are part of Fish and Wildlife Conservation lands, any airboating access that is part of the Kissimmee Basin on South Florida lands, that all stays. It doesn't go away. We want no interest in that. That's all just off the table. We're not going to change that at all. For the lands that are part of the conservation area, the private landowners that we're talking about, that land is still under their control as far as providing access. If they've got hunting leases, or if they're running horses, or they're allowing ATVs, we're not interested in those types of activities as well. We're not going to control those at all. And these are just some of the people that we've been in discussions with. A wide-ranging group of people. Also talking with beginning to talk to some of the local counties and their land use and land planning boards. Okay, I want to turn this over to Rose to talk a little bit about some of the planning process that we're going through.
Thank you, Charlie. Our land acquisition planning is a whole project in itself. And it basically consists of two phases. We're already past the first phase, which is preliminary planning. Preliminary planning is the internal phase of the process. That portion has been done. The things that Charlie talked about, looking at the biological values of the area, that's been looked at. The study areas have been determined, and all that information was sent to our Washington office, and the director of the service reviewed that proposal and basically gave us the go-ahead. He liked the proposal, gave us the go-ahead to go forward with what we call detailed planning, which is what we started doing with the public scoping meetings. Detailed planning, and if you I guess I already went through the preliminary planning. One last thing, the director did approve this project to go into detailed planning. He approved it back in August of 2010. And so we've been working with the partners and internally to get things together so that we could then come to you all and present the preliminary stages of this project to get your input so that we can then go back and start working on the documents. The detailed planning steps outlines here. Right now we're in public scoping. Public scoping is set to end at the end of February. From February until June, we'll be working on the draft land protection plan. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what a land protection plan is on the next slide. But we will come back to the public and mail out a draft land protection plan and NEPA document. I'm going to explain what a NEPA document is. Those will come out in June. You will have a minimum of 30 days to review those documents and provide us your comments and concerns, issues. We will then take those comments, concerns, and issues, revise our document, respond to those comments. Now let me explain. You're not going to get a letter back from us saying, you had this comment, and here's our response to your comment. When the final document comes out, there will be a section in it that lists all of the public comments, and it will also list the service's responses to those comments. And that's where you will find your responses. So we will work putting together the final document. The final document will then go to Washington for the director review. The director will review the document and make his determination. And then once he has made his determination, then we will make the final document public for everyone to see what the decision was. Okay, I said I would explain what a land protection plan is, and I'll also explain what our NEPA document is. The land protection plan is going to lay out what the actual proposal is. It's going to go through what the objectives, goals and objectives are of the proposed project. Goals and objectives of the National Wildlife Refuge as well as the conservation area. It's going to show you, it's going to have detailed maps that are going to show you the actual 150,000 acres that we've been talking about. Right now we've been talking about a study area. We're going to put together what we've received from you all in the scoping meetings, as well as looking at biological information, input from landowners, input from partners, to determine where best that 150,000 acres should be. That will be in the land protection plan. There will also be, we call it a priority list and a priority map. You will see what we're proposing, or within what we're proposing, it'll show priority areas. And we typically use 3 priority areas, and it'll explain why this area is priority level 1 and why this area over here is priority level 3. Okay, if you would. Okay. All federal agencies are required by NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, to do certain things. And we have 4 basic things that we are required to do. And the process that we're going through sets the stage for us to accomplish these things. We must identify and address the potential environmental impacts of a project. We involve the public in the planning process. And as I said, this is just the first step in the detailed planning of having your involvement in our process. We will do and are doing a systematic approach to explain and lay out the project. And another really critical point is that the project, we are required to have a range of alternatives. I want to speak a little bit about this, our range of alternatives. We will always have a no-action alternative. And we will lay out, based on the goals and objectives of the project, how the no-action alternative addresses those goals and opportunities, goals and objectives. We will have at least probably 2 other alternatives. We may have more depending on how it all works out. But every alternative, we will look at how each alternative addresses the goals and objectives of the proposal. We will have in the draft document a proposed alternative. Based on everything that we've put together and looking at all the alternatives, that will be the alternative that we think at that time is the best alternative to meet the goals and objectives of the project. One thing before I get into these points, another component of the land protection plan and the NEPA document there's going to be some appendices in it. Two appendices that, from everything that I've heard last week and also tonight, two things that you all are going to want to focus on is the conceptual management plan and the interim compatibility determinations. And those two appendices are going to give you the best explanation and understanding that we can give of what we see, how we see we're going to manage the refuge, and what current uses that are in the area, what current uses we see that we can still allow on the National Wildlife Refuge. Those two things will be in place on the refuge if it's established until we actually do what we call a CCP, which is a comprehensive conservation plan. Every refuge has one of those, and basically it's a 15-year management plan. So those two things, the interim compatibility determination and the conceptual management plan, will be in effect until the CCP is completed for the refuge. And the CCP process acts just like this. You'll go through the same steps of public involvement, range of alternatives for that too. Points to remember. Lands within the acquisition boundary are not subject to refuge regulations, jurisdiction, unless and until an interest in real property is acquired through a conservation easement, lease, donation, or fee title purchase. Landowners that are within the acquisition boundary retain all rights, privileges, responsibilities, and you get to pay tax too, as long as it's under your private land ownership. The refuge ownership around you or near you has no effect on you. Lastly, this also includes the right for your access, hunting, vehicle use, controlled trespass, and the right to sell your property to any party, including the service, as well as anyone else. And I'm going to turn it now over to our Realty Chief, Tamar Hogan.
Thank
you, Rose. Good evening. It's nice to be here. Such a large turnout. My name is Tamar Hogan. I'm the Chief of Realty for the Fish and Wildlife Service based out of Atlanta, Georgia. And where Realty comes into play here is once we have gone through all of the detailed planning and the final land protection plan is presented to our director, which, as Rose mentioned, we're hoping that would be sometime in the fall this coming year, September 2011. Realty would then become involved once our director has approved that refuge or conservation area combination. So the Division of Realty would get involved at that point. So the question is, when can the service acquire an interest in land? So when would that happen after these two things have occurred? When the final land protection plan is approved, and the LPP will include maps and descriptions of the approved acquisition boundaries. So where can we acquire lands and interest? Only within that, we call it an AAB. It's an approved acquisition boundary. And this is the AAB. It is identified in the land protection plan. And within that area, it's at that point that folks in our Realty Division would then identify landowners and may consider negotiations for the acquisition of those lands or interests. Charlie mentioned this earlier about the fee title lands and conservation easements. These are primarily what we would be seeking to acquire. And I think Charlie did also talk a little bit about conservation easements. They're going to limit the certain types of uses or prevent the development in perpetuity while the land remains in the private ownership. The service would seek to tailor these individually so that we can meet the landowner's needs as well as the conservation needs. So what are the advantages of conservation easements? The land would remain in the natural state, private landowner retains ownership, and the services needs as well as the landowner's needs are met. Next question is, what is our process? How does the Division of Realty work? Well, once we've gone through this detailed planning, we have this approved acquisition boundary, we're now looking at these ownerships, identifying interested landowners, and typically we will be be mailing letters out to folks within this AAB and seeking permission to appraise their properties. And at that point, this is a willing seller program. People send their permission forms back. Then we would seek to obtain an appraisal of the market value of the property. Once the appraisal has been reviewed and approved by our Department of Interior appraisal group, the Office of Valuation Services, then we'd be in a position to prepare a statement of just compensation and make a written offer to a landowner. So a lot of folks want to know how is the federal government going to fund such a program as this land acquisition? We do have two primary sources of funding for the Fish and Wildlife Service: the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is a congressionally appropriated fund, and we also have the Migratory Bird Conservation Fund. And Charlie did mention that earlier. It's the duck stamp program. Another source of potential funding would be the North American Wetlands Conservation Fund, which is a grants program administered by the Fish and Wildlife Service. A lot of questions did come up at our last meeting in Kissimmee about county taxes. What does the service do to compensate for that loss of tax revenue when we purchase properties? We make revenue sharing payments to the counties for the land that we have acquired. In rural areas, revenue sharing payments may exceed the tax payments. So this is another question that comes up is, well, how do we compute our revenue sharing payments? This act that passed in 1935 and then was amended again in 1964 requires that the service calculate payments based on the greatest of three different things: 3/4 of 1% of the market value of the property, 25% of the net receipts into this account, or 75 cents per acre. And another question that has come up is, does the payment remain the same year after year? The actual assessments or calculations in these administered areas will change just like assessments on private lands change. We are required to reappraise the land, the fee title land, every 5 years, and then base our calculations, our revenue share payments on those appraised values. Where does the money come from to make the payments? The net income the service receives from products or privileges like timber sales, grazing fees, and right of permit fees is deposited into the National Wildlife Refuge Fund for the revenue sharing payments. What if there isn't enough money to cover the payments? And this has happened where the Congress actually has the authority to appropriate additional monies to fund this account. That wraps it up for the realty discussion. I will be here the rest of the presentation and for the evening, so if you have any specific land acquisition questions or realty questions, I will be here to answer those questions.